Welcome back to the 2022 APAICS Energy Summit and our last panel of the day. I'm Madalene Mielke, President and CEO of APAICS. Before I introduce the final panel, I'd like to introduce Congressman Marc Veasey. Congressman Veasey represents Texas' 33rd Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives and was appointed to serve on the Committee on Energy and Commerce and House Armed Services Committee. Throughout his time in Congress, Congressman Veasey founded the first Congressional Voting Rights Caucus to address the immediate need to eliminate the barriers and discrimination too many Americans face at the polls. Congressman Veasey is currently a member of the U.S. Helsinki Commission, the Congressional Black Caucus, and the New Democrat Coalition. Welcome to the APAICS Energy Summit, Congressman Veasey.
Hello, my name is Congressman Marc Veasey, and I have the honor of representing the 33rd District of Texas, which includes part of my hometown of Fort Worth, along with parts of Dallas, Irving, Grand Prairie, and Arlington. And while I can't attend in person, I'm excited to join the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies virtually for your Energy Summit. I'm here to help kick off your next panel titled The Energy Transition, a Roadmap for Our Nation. My home state of Texas is the nation's undisputed energy leader for the last century. Production of reliable domestic energy is important to a strong and resilient economy, and Texas has played a huge role in that. With the natural resources of our state, including abundant wind and solar energy, Texas is poised to continue leading as our nation's energy economy evolves. With energy prices at an all-time high, it is imperative that we work to find solutions that will help our nation's economy from the whims of volatile global commodity markets. In the coming decade, electric vehicles with lower fuel and maintenance costs compared to gasoline-powered vehicles are poised to grow tremendously. In fact, just a few miles from where I stand right now at the GM plant down the road in Arlington, many of those vehicles are going to be built by Texans for Texans. But make no mistake, the transition to more sustainable energy will not happen overnight. We must work to ensure that the energy we consume today is used efficiently and responsibly. We must also make sure that energy remains affordable and reliable throughout this period. I'm proud to work with my colleagues in Congress to pass historic legislation from the Infrastructure Investment and Job Acts to the Inflation Reduction Acts. These new laws make critical investments for reaching our environmental goals. Included in these laws are provisions I push to develop our nation's carbon management infrastructure and increase the deployment of energy efficiency and cleaner energy technologies. Our work is not done. I look forward to working with the Biden administration to ensure the laws are implemented to the fullest effect and that funds made available are deployed as quickly as possible. Thank you again for allowing me to join you virtually. It's an honor to have participated in the 2022 Energy Summit.
Next, I'd like to introduce Congressman Jerry McNerney, who represents California's 9th District. Congressman McNerney serves on the Committee on Energy and Commerce and the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Prior to his election to Congress, he formed a startup company to manufacture wind turbines. During his career in wind energy, Congressman McNerney's work contributed to saving the equivalent of approximately 30 million barrels of oil, or 8.3 million tons of carbon dioxide. Welcome to the APAICS Energy Summit, Congressman McNerney.
Hello, I'm Congressman Jerry McNerney. I'm honored to be asked to present to APAICS today on the energy transition, a roadmap for the nation. The Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies was founded by a gentleman and a leader I had the honor to meet, Norm Mineta. As a congressman, Norm focused on infrastructure, and that's very appropriate to my topic today. But instead of transportation infrastructure, I have focused on energy infrastructure. Like transportation, energy is the lifeblood of our economy and our nation's strength. Today, energy is playing a major role in how our economy will grow for the next decades. We need an energy infrastructure that is reliable, affordable, and does not contribute to climate change. We can see the impacts of climate change wherever we look, both at home and abroad. These impacts will continue to grow until the changes become catastrophic unless we act with urgency. In fact, significant change is now baked into the system, and the only question is, will we reverse course in time to prevent catastrophe? Another climate-related issue is how severe weather is impacting our electrical infrastructure. Drought combined with unprecedented high wind is causing wildfires that are often started by downed power lines, but also destroy electrical infrastructure. What's happening in California is an example. Another example of inadequate electric infrastructure is what happened in Texas a couple of winters ago. So what does this have to do with you? Well, the changes will impact you personally one way or another, but there is an incredible array of opportunities opening up for those with the right skills, vision, and determination. I'm an engineer, so my views are biased, but our nation needs to develop and implement low carbon technologies of all kinds. We need a robust national electric transmission system. We need public transportation that is safe, reliable, convenient, and affordable. We need to make our buildings and our cities more efficient. We need to create a carbon-free energy. We need to transition to carbon capture farming. We need to make industry net zero. We may also need to pull carbon right out of the air. There are plenty of needs for good technical work, but that's not all, not by a long shot. We need business people and financiers who have the vision and drive to push commerce to sustainability. We need politicians and bureaucrats who can push policy in the direction of zero emissions. We need technicians who can actually make things work. We need people who can direct the national narrative to sustainability. And we will need plenty of people to interact with other nations, either in education, business, or government, and work collaboratively to find innovative solutions to shared challenges. In particular, we need to work closely with China and India. Right now, we are starting the necessary transition. We aren't doing enough. Much more is needed. And that will fall on the younger generation to take up the mantle and charge forward. This is already happening as young people are demanding climate action. So there you have it. Climate change is happening. It's serious and threatening. It will impact every person on Earth, and if we ignore it, the changes will soon enough be catastrophic. But with ingenuity, creativity, determination, we can transform our nation and lead the world to a cleaner, safer, more stable, and even more equitable world. The challenge is upon you. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Veasey and Congressman McNerney, for your remarks. And finally, our last panel of the day, the energy transition, a roadmap for our nation. Today, energy transition is at the heart of climate change mitigation efforts in the United States and around the world. This panel will explore how the industry is working towards solving this energy puzzle and its impact on AA and NHPI communities. Our moderator for this session is Emilie Ikeda, an NBC News correspondent for all the network's platforms, including Today, NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, NBC News Now, NBC News Daily, and MSNBC. Since joining NBC News in July of 2021, you frequently find Emilie covering business news and breaking down what the developments mean for American families, reporting on the tumultuous housing market, baby formula shortage, decades-high inflation, and the Federal Reserve's aggressive interest rate hikes. Welcome to Emilie and to our panelists.
Hi, everyone. As Madalene mentioned, I'm Emilie Ikeda, and I'm thrilled to be part of this important discussion around the energy transition, a roadmap for our nation. Energy transition is at the heart of climate change mitigation efforts in the U.S. and around the world. As part of this panel, we'll explore how the industry is working towards solving the energy puzzle and its impact on AAPI communities. We have a fantastic lineup for you, including Michael Cohen, Chief U.S. Economist and Head of Oil and Refining in BP's Strategy Strategy, Sustainability, and Ventures Group. Michael is responsible for oil market and industry analysis. He frequently lectures on energy, oil markets, and geopolitics at several universities. Michael's experience also includes more than a decade as an economist in the public sector. We will also hear from Robert G., who is the president of G Strategies Group, a consulting firm focused on policy analysis, advocacy, and litigation support in the energy and utility sectors. He also serves as president of Asian Americans in Energy, the Environment, and Commerce. Bob has 4 decades of experience in the energy industry, working in a variety of roles as attorney, senior state and federal official, and tech executive. Our third panelist is Jerry Griffin, general manager of Delta Airlines sustainability team. Beyond designing Delta's decarbonization strategy, he launched a team managing fuel savings across airline operations and established Delta's Contrail research collaboration with MIT. Previously, Jerry led initiatives in Delta's airport, customer service, and cargo divisions, and worked at McKinsey and Company. Okay, folks, so let's dive right in. So this first one, I'm going to go to each of you on this question. And what I want you to do is describe your organization's perspective on the energy transition and what it looks like. How does this vision incorporate and impact the AAPI community? Bob, let's go to you first.
Thank you so much, Emilie. And I want to thank the sponsors of this program, APAICS, for inviting me to speak today. And I'm going to offer my usual disclaimer. My remarks are my own today and should not be attributed to any organization with which I'm affiliated. Very briefly, Emilie, the energy transition has had an interesting impact on my organization over its 11-year history. We are a affinity organization for AAPI professionals in the energy and environment and commerce sectors. And we emphasize the opportunities that our organization provides in terms of professional networking and education. And I would say most directly, as far as content is concerned, in terms of the educational programs we've been producing, we've noticed a significant shift in emphasis from what I would call legacy energy resources about 10 years ago to more sustainable and green and renewable resources. Not because we're leaving behind the legacy resources, but because that is where there has been opportunities for professional growth and development. And as our younger members have joined also, they're very interested not only in the technology underlying the more innovative side of energy and energy resources, they're also looking for professional opportunities. And so our organization is focused on providing both educational content as well as networking opportunities for them to find their place in the emerging opportunities in the energy and environment sector.
Fantastic. And we'll be diving into some of those opportunities a little bit later. Let's go to Michael next on this first question.
So thank you again, and thank you to all of the organizers for providing BP with the opportunity to share our views. I think it's important to understand that there's a wide range of uncertainty associated with the energy transition. And one of the principal roles that I play as part of the Strategy, Sustainability, and Ventures Group at BP is putting forward an outlook for the world and for the energy system out for the next 2 to 3 decades. And so given the fact that there is this broad range of uncertainty, what we try to take from the scenario work that we do is try to understand what are the commonalities across the different scenarios. So across all of these scenarios, we see an increasing role for renewables, an increasing role for low carbon fuels, including hydrogen, an increasing role for biofuels, and of course, an increasing role for electrification as a share of total final consumption. So the energy that we all use as individuals increasingly becomes more and more electrified. Now, what we take as well from all of this work that we do on scenarios is that the cost of technology that we assume and the policies that we assume as part of these scenarios help widen or narrow that range of uncertainty. And we as a company, much as we as a society, we as governments, policymakers, have to develop a strategy that is robust to the range of uncertainty that is explained by these several scenarios. And so, just to explain what these scenarios mean and how we use them, one of the scenarios basically is similar to a business as usual kind of scenarios, so not that much of a change in emissions. A middle ground is something where we assume that announced pledges are actually fully fleshed out and fully achieved. You get something like a 70% reduction in emissions in that scenario, which we call or we used to call a rapid scenario, but now basically is called a rapid transition scenario. And in addition, the thing that we take away from the final scenario is one that gets to a net zero scenario, so one that is aligned by 1.5 degree climate target. And so when we look at all of these scenarios, understand what the commonalities are and what the industry looks like in the future, it's clear that there is a much more diverse mix and variety of fuels and a need for integrators. And so this is the primary driver for why we have shifted from an international oil company that's focused on just producing resources to an integrated energy company. And I think the other thing that we need to reflect on when we think about the energy transition is that 70% of global emissions come from energy consumption across industry, transport, and the energy sector itself. And it's these sectors that need to be transformed. So we see that it's really important that renewables are growing. They've been growing by 300% over the last 10 years, but it still represents only about 5% of global energy demand today. So we need companies that are at the heart of the energy system today to also be along and start along this pathway of transitioning for the future. So yeah, I'll just stop there and just in terms of how we see the transition from a macro perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Michael, for weighing in on that. Lastly, I'll go to Jerry, posing the same question about Delta's perspective, but keeping in mind that transportation is one of the largest contributors of GHG emissions in the US. Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to say thanks for having us. Thanks for having Delta here to speak with you. And yeah, really excited to talk about this topic. I'm a relative newbie to the space, so Bob and Michael definitely making me feel less educated, but I will say, agree with everything that they've said to this point. I think stepping back and thinking big picture, right? This idea of the energy transition is a complete rethinking of how we produce and deliver energy globally, right? And that's, energy has been the foundation of all the modern conveniences and successes we've had in our society. And so I don't want to understate how big that is, right? We've definitely went through transitions in the past, whether it was from coal to natural gas, introduction of nuclear power, the scaling of wind and solar investment. So there's no reason to think that we can't address this challenge in the future. I think that's one of the most exciting parts about working in the space. But, we're in the airline industry, we're fundamentally thinking about how do we move away from fossil fuels, this amazingly convenient, reliable source of energy, to something new and something that's going to have to be powered by clean, abundant, and very cheap energy. So I just want to put this I want to give an example to this. So hydrogen is often talked about a potential replacement in this energy transition for fossil fuels for airlines. As a thought exercise, let's say I powered all of the flights at Charles de Gaulle Airport with hydrogen, and I wanted to make that hydrogen from green energy. I would need at least 1.5 times the energy capacity of the world's largest existing nuclear plant just to make fuel for all the Charles de Gaulle flights. That's a massive amount of investment that is going to bring together public, private sector, really everyone in the world to try and address those types of large infrastructure investments. So, to answer that last part of the question about how does this vision incorporate and impact, the communities that we're talking about today, it absolutely does. It impacts everyone on Earth, right? But there's these massive opportunities that we can go after that will both have this, advantage for the environment, for human health by reducing the amount of other emissions that come from some of these dirtier energy producing sources. And so when you start to really deep dive into the projects that are going to take place, you look at what's happening with the Department of Energy's hydrogen hubs and direct air capture hubs. Those go down to a community level where you can really think about, how you can get involved and the types of industries that are going to be created or evolve over time. So just a exciting time to think about, I think, entering any sector in the US economy and sort of what you can bring to the table by having this focus on what will be, even if it is smaller than expected or slower than expected, is going to be, a massive change in how we think about where our energy comes from and how we use it.
Jerry, your response is a good segue into our next topic of discussion, the challenges and problem solving when it comes to the energy transition. I used the word puzzle earlier because of the unique challenges the energy sector faces. While the goal is to reach net zero, to stop putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the demand for things like electricity is expected to continue to soar. What are the major challenges preventing faster, more efficient development that would further energy transition? And in what ways are your organizations working to address these challenges? Bob, we'll go to you first again.
Yeah, that's an awful lot to unpack. So let me try to break it up into several parts, and I'm going to be wearing several hats in my answer. So forgive me if I shift back and forth. As an energy expert who's been at this business for over 40 years, working on a transition is not going to be easy because you've got to scale and do a lot of research and development and demonstration of innovative technologies in time to be able to meet your policy targets to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions or to go net zero carbon, let's say by 2035 under the goal of the current administration, or 2040 for economy-wide. So those are grand ambitions that will require a huge volume of research, development, and demonstration, of finance, and also of capital stock turnover. Okay, and you're also going to have to adapt and educate the public, both individuals as well as commercial establishments and businesses, how to use energy in a different way. So you're going to have to. Part of that's going to be involving customer modification of behavior as well. So that's the first level. The second level that I want to speak to more directly from my organization, Asian Americans in Energy, Environment, and Commerce. It does open up, and I think Jerry touched on this, just an entire array of different professional opportunities. Many of the jobs that we'll be seeing created over the next 2 decades probably don't even exist yet, because you're developing new and innovative technologies, you're scaling them, and you're commercializing them. And I've noticed just since the formation of our organization, as I mentioned, or even over my professional lifetime, Asian Americans typically have gravitated to a lot of STEM professions, science, math, engineering. Though that's sort of been the traditional stereotyped area where many Asian Americans have excelled, not just in the energy sector, but also throughout professional disciplines. But what I've noticed is that a lot more Asian Americans are gravitating away or moving away from STEM specifically and are getting more into things like finance, professional project development, entrepreneurship, because they're trying to gain a foothold in the new energy economy, both from a business standpoint as well as from a technology standpoint. And many of them are marrying a number of disciplines in order to become leaders in the new sustainable energy sector. That's a trend I've noticed that's occurred over the last decade or so. And I see a lot of that continuing, where some of them may already have had, let's say, disciplines that were very heavily grounded in science and tech, but now they've gotten MBAs, and now they're ready to move on into project finance, project development, and actually trying to go out and raise capital. So I do see that there's an opportunity there. Let me stop right there. I have a lot more to speak about the subject, but that's something that I've witnessed within our own community even over the last decade.
Yeah, appreciate that insight. And we'll be able to dive into some of those upcoming exciting opportunities later in this conversation. Jerry, we'll go to you next. What's Delta's take on this?
Yeah, so, the major challenges to this, I kind of think of this both near term and long term. So, on the near term side, and I'm sure I'll say some things that Michael will expand on given his role at BP, but near term, we don't have the right incentives in place right now to reward the type of risk taking that's needed for those first projects to get off the ground. Mainly because the what we'll call the green premium is just so high for these new types of fuels, right? So even if you're producing a new type of biofuel that's relatively cheap in sort of the spectrum of advanced fuels, without additional financial support in place, those fuels are going to be 2 to 3 times more expensive or more. And that's where, there's sort of this theme I'll talk about here around de-risking that type of investment and reducing the green premium is so important. So, I think of a few parties and sort of what they can do. So on the buyer side, right now I'm speaking, someone who works at Delta Airlines. Buyers like airlines provide a big piece of the puzzle, which is an offtake agreement or an agreement, and sort of an obligation produced to purchase this fuel if the economic objectives of that project are met, right? So it's conditional on the pricing being right and the quality of the fuel being right. And we also work with our customers. We have fantastic corporate customers who even to date have agreed to pay for the premium of their fuel because they want to mitigate their own emissions when they travel. So they have this desire to, be philanthropic and address their environmental footprint. Right. For producers, I think we're seeing a lot of things take place. I want to be complimentary to BP and what Michael talked about, this transition and some of the goals that we've seen in, annual reports and capital markets days from BP around, a more allocation of R&D, retooling and sort of rethinking strategies around fuel development. On the financier side, right, on the capital allocation side of things, a lot of a fuel facility is just expensive, even for a fossil fuel facility, a fossil fuel refinery, right? So you move to these advanced fuel technologies, you can imagine that the risk goes up even higher when you're thinking about financing these projects, which is a big source of the cost that you pay when you get to the pump, right? So thinking about new risk models that help handle, how do you deal with these new types of technologies without putting too much, penalty in the sort of cost of capital that goes to those projects. And then government is going to play a big role. The Inflation Reduction Act added a lot of incentives, but longer term financial support will be needed to get a lot of new projects off the ground. Simplification of some, of permitting processes and just making it easier for some of these new technologies to come into place safely and with the right support from agencies out there. So that's sort of the near term side. And then longer term, I always go back to the grid as my go-to answer, partly because I don't have to solve that problem because I'm an airline. I'm joking about that, of course. But the real reason I say that is all these solutions are going to rely on clean, cheap, abundant sources of energy that are on a grid that's resilient. That is not a problem that just solves itself. It's not just going to happen. There's a lot of great technologies that we have available today that are very cheap in wind and solar, but those don't address the full problem. So longer term, I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges and one that, I don't think we don't have that full solution path mapped out yet.
Yeah, understandably, we're hearing a lot about cost. Michael, one of the things we've talked about is affordability. What are some of the challenges in an energy transition and assuring it's a just one?
Yeah, so just with respect to the whole multitude of challenges, I just want to echo everything that my fellow panelists have said. I think that there are a couple, just in terms of the achievement of a just transition, that we need to recognize that, there is this idea, and I think it's the right one, that energy does provide this lifeblood of economic and social well-being. And in that regard, we have to respect the fact that there is what we call an energy trilemma. We have to enable the sustainable use and sustainable production of energy. We have to respect that there's a security element to that as well, and finally an affordability element. And so when it comes to thinking about a just transition, that last one is really key. So I appreciate, Emilie, you're bringing this up. So I think in that regard, when we look across the spectrum of different sources and uses of energy, it's important to understand that there's going to be political challenges with the implementation of policies. For however many years, for the last 10 years in the United States, industry supported and advocated around a carbon tax. And the reality was that wasn't politically palatable. And we now have something that's far more, a combination of different incentives, both carrots and sticks in the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as different state-based initiatives and lots of different policies overlapping against one another. And no, from an economist perspective, that's not the most efficient solution, but it is one that's politically palatable and got across the line. And I think we have to understand that and reflect on that, understand how that succeeded, and try to learn from that going forward. I think the challenges of a just transition are also going to affect the developing world in a big way, and that will have a domino effect on the United States and on communities in the United States as well. But the challenges there are going to be far more substantial than what we are facing here in the United States or in other industrialized countries with institutions that work and political systems that work, and maybe in some of these other countries, the challenges will be far greater. And I think the other thing to just keep in mind, we've seen this proliferation of net zero commitments across the board by corporations, by institutions, by entities in the financial sector, by governments, but we've not seen, when you start to reflect on those commitments and actual actions, we should commend ourselves on the Inflation Reduction Act, but we see this widening gap between aspirations and action. And so it's important to keep that in mind as well. Then the final thing I think to just keep in mind is that in some cases, the challenges aren't purely an economic challenge, or a technological development challenge. In some cases, it's a behavioral challenge, or it's something that's focused on society and an interest in preserving the status quo. Whether this is a question around the geopolitics of the energy transition or a question around ensuring that there is a just transition for minority communities or for communities that are the most affected by what is to come in terms of how our economy transitions away from its carbon intensive state to something that is less carbon intensive. So a whole host of different challenges that the world and policymakers and governments are grappling with here to bring us to a lower carbon outcome.
Sure, Michael, stay with me on this next question. Many sectors, just digging into the process a little bit more, many sectors have to play a role to meet climate change goals, but especially the oil and gas industry, directly and indirectly, you alluded to this earlier, the oil and gas industry's operations account for a significant percent of global greenhouse gas emissions. So how do oil and gas companies decarbonize?
Yeah, so it's a whole host of different solutions, right? And we have to understand that there are sort of three parts to this problem. One is the emissions associated with our operations, so what we call Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. The second is what's associated with what we market, so how we resell and buy and sell some of the energy that we are producing. In some ways, that's aggregated with other sources of energy. And then the final, most important one, which is what you're alluding to, Emilie, is when the emissions or when the fuel associated with that production is combusted, that is what we call Scope 3 emissions. So this is outside our particular framework. It's sort of a demand side challenge. So we are taking a broad approach to trying to solve this problem across the board. And we have stated to our investors and our stakeholders and shareholders over the course of the last 2 years that our new purpose is to reimagine what energy means for people and our planet. And so the purpose is not a nice to have just for businesses. We are part of the society, and how we treat our employees and support the communities that they work in, coordinate with governments, work with shareholders, all of this matters. And so we've developed a sustainability frame. We're bringing together all of these different areas of focus, which is supporting a just transition, helping more than 1 million people build sustainable livelihoods and resilience, and promoting greater diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of our workforce and customers. And so there are a number of different pillars that the strategy is founded upon, and this is including reducing our operational footprint. Since 2019, we've reduced by 35% the emissions across our operations, a 16% reduction in the scope 3, so what we've sold on and how that is combusted, and that all puts us on a track to achieve that lower emissions outcome. But this has to be profitable for us to do. We still have shareholders that we need to answer to, and so what we are doing is we're taking some of those profits, we're increasing the amount of allocation every year that is going to be invested into renewables and lower carbon investments. So in 2021, we increased from 750 million in 2020 to 2.2 billion in those low carbon ventures and those low carbon opportunities. And so by 2030, we aim to be investing 5 billion per year in those low carbon energy vectors, or roughly a third of all of the spending that we plan by that time. So this is a transition that will take time, and is something that we are including in divesting in some of our oil and gas assets and using those funds to support increasing amount of low carbon investments across the energy system.
And Jerry, I'll go to you next on this, but with the transportation industry, I'm also curious how technology is playing a role in some kind of solution.
Yeah, absolutely. So technology is going to be key. And, I talked a little bit about de-risking some of these solutions that we need for our industry. But wherever you look for our industry, there's going to be new technology needed. So there's things even today, right, with we'll go to air traffic control. So one of the ways that we burn excess fuel is due to the fact that it's very hard to change a lot of existing systems that have to operate at an extremely high safety rate, right? And we take that extremely seriously as an industry. But air traffic control, there's a ton of investment NASA has put into technologies that create a sort of ways of the skies. If we use that term, it's called TASAR. It's technology that's been developed that we're all going to have to collaborate on and put into production down the road so that aircraft can be more connected and fly more efficient routes, take advantage of changing airspace, and take advantage of changing weather patterns to fly straighter and more fuel efficiently. If you look a little farther out into sort of sustainable aviation fuel development, there's this wide landscape of technologies and methods to produce fuel. We use the term SAF, and it's a little unfortunate because it captures such a broad array of products that is not captured by just even fossil fuel alone today. So, the fuels that we're putting offtakes in for now are more proven technologies using agricultural-based products that, capture carbon in the air in order to create that hydrocarbon that we need to put in the plane. But if we look farther out for something that scales for the amount of fuel that the airline industry would need, you start to look at what are called power to liquid or e-fuels that would rely on much cheaper electrolysis that doesn't exist today, and ways to capture carbon from the atmosphere that's much too expensive for making a business case today. But, with the right people in place and the right knowledge and research and development, that cost curve may come down over time to get there. And then you look at the planes we fly, right? And so there's a lot of work right now on battery technology, hydrogen propulsion technology, hydrogen fuel cell technology to take advantage of sort of that zero emissions propulsion that you could have there, but highly challenged due to the amount of weight that those take up relative to a fossil fuel. So the airline industry is really balancing, what mix of solutions can go into place. Can we operate a mixed fleet? Let's say we had battery and liquid fuel burning aircraft. How would we operate a mixed fleet? Is that even a feasible future that we could see ourselves in? So I think the role of a lot of sustainability sort of professionals in this space is around thinking about those trade-offs in technology and how we place our bets so that we're supporting the development of all these things in the near term, and know that some of these might not progress the way we would like, but there has to be risk taking in order to figure that out over time. So.
Yeah, and this advancing technology, some of these unanswered questions, perhaps providing more space for members of the AAPI community to get involved in the energy industry. A recent survey shows 75% of Asian American voters consider the environment very or extremely important. And while achieving climate change goals may sway how members of the AAPI community are voting, how do you get the community energized about the energy industry, and what opportunities should we be excited about? Jerry, we'll go to you first on this.
So I'm relatively new to this space, and I always tell people that I'm not really a sustainability person. I probably shouldn't say this on this panel, but what I mean by this is a space that people have been excited about, for a subset of folks have been very, very passionate about, and I think that's increasing. My profession started in the banking and finance sectors, and I never saw myself entering this space. And I tell this whole story to say that I love working in this sector because it's so interdisciplinary. Most of the problems that you're talking about and the challenges you're talking about are edge cases or totally new thoughts for the industry that you're in. So just from a person like myself who's very intellectually curious and is really passionate about learning and progressing my own knowledge, it's such a fun space to work in, and one that's very rewarding. The second thing I'll say is I think we orient all these technologies around being good for climate change. But when you step back and look at some of the things we're talking about, a lot of these technologies are just better. They're better for the air that we breathe in on the ground. They're often quieter for the folks that are operating them. They're often more comfortable. The example I give is I'd suggest anyone drive an electric car and tell me, and I love internal combustion cars because I grew up liking cars as a kid. Now I feel guilty about it, but I challenge anyone to drive an electric car and tell me that it's not a superior product. And that goes beyond just the environmental benefits. And I think you look at some of these things and you're saying, we're going to redesign how the airplane functions. There's all these amazing other things that you get to work on at the same time. You really get to not only manage this environmental problem, which is very much the focus, but you're really just focused on creating a better future and better solutions for any industry that you're in when you're focused on these. So you're kind of challenging conventional thinking, sort of the conventional processes in place. So this is a long-winded answer, but hopefully that helps.
No, it was great, and perhaps a broader appeal for people to get involved into this industry. Bob, let's go to you next. I know your organization recently worked with the U.S. Department of Energy on a recruiting effort.
Yes, we were asked by the Department of Energy to do two things. One, we held a workshop to explain what was in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act relative to the creation of the Clean Energy Job Corps at the U.S. Department of Energy, 1,000 new jobs being created. And they asked us to be a vehicle to communicate not only to the API community, but to other diverse communities, what the new opportunities were to go work at the Department of Energy and the broad array of different professions within this group called the Clean Energy Job Corps that's going to administer many of the terms that are now included in the Inflation Reduction Act. So we did that. We also launched our Massachusetts chapter just about 3 weeks ago, and we also brought in a very high-level senior appointee from the Biden administration who headed the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity to give us our keynote address which touched on energy justice. And let me say a few words about that, because people wonder, why should the AAPI community be concerned about energy justice? There are two levels to our level of awareness and engagement. The first is, obviously, as users of the energy ecosystem, we are acutely aware, as many are, including the members of this panel, that there has been a disproportionate burden that communities, or that underserved and communities of color have had to labor under with our existing legacy energy infrastructure over a generation. And we're talking about multiple decades. So as a consequence of moving our energy usage away from legacy resources to sustainable resources in this transition, we don't want to create the same mistakes. For instance, we're going to have to lay an additional, significantly larger number of transmission lines all across the United States in order to integrate new and larger scale basins of renewable energy, particularly solar and wind. And in siting those transmission lines, we want to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes that we made when we, again, put burdens on disproportionately on underserved communities and communities of color. And I know that many API members, particularly those that spend a lot of time in public policy, are very focused on trying to maintain a keen level of awareness so that doesn't happen. The other is that as stewards of what I call active civic life, we want to make sure that the benefits of the energy transition are shared equally and proportionately among all communities, including underserved communities. And that means that if an AAPI community might not necessarily be an underserved community, they want to make sure that the benefits of higher education, STEM education, and employment are made equally available to underserved communities so that we do have a vibrant and diverse and trained workforce. So our organization is spending a lot of time on that. That's why we had this speaker launch our Massachusetts chapter to talk about energy justice so that we can make our members aware and see what roles they can play to make this a meaningful and just transition.
Yeah, thank you for underscoring that point on access and a just transition. Michael and Bob, I'll stay with you. You both have experience in the public and private sector. How can these two worlds better come together to help with the energy transition and with providing opportunities? Michael, let's go to you first on this.
So there's one example I just wanted to share, and that is the example that we have with our partnership with the city of Houston. And so in July of 2020, we signed an agreement with the city to be their strategic planning and technical partner on a climate action plan over the next 4 years. And so this plan has now been combined with their resilience plan, and it basically entails us providing experts to the city to help identify different priority programs, lead working groups, and other different areas of the plan. So there's also grant money that's involved, and so these sort of broader, initiatives that are trying to match up skills and attributes across the public sector and private sector are one way that I think that we can see that sort of becoming more and more prominent across the country. We have a region, cities, and solutions group within BP that their primary goal is to be working with a lot of these different regions or cities and trying to identify and find ways to more ably and more quickly develop decarbonization solutions across these different geographies. So that's just speaking a little bit about BP's example. I think more generally speaking, there's a lot of different initiatives that are encoded into the Inflation Reduction Act and other legislation passed over the last year that seeks to build that partnership. There's grant money that is available for hydrogen hubs. A lot of different companies are involved in that, but essentially that hydrogen hub is going to be chosen to be in several areas that are going to require stakeholder engagement. And that's a key part of the development of any of these energy assets to ensure that you have the right kind of support in order to have a more sustainable outcome. So that's just one example. And that I wanted to share about our experience across the U.S.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Michael. Bob, I want to get your take on this too. What are your thoughts about building better connectivity?
No, I appreciate that. Having served both in the private sector as well as state and federal government, I also want to reiterate what we just heard from Michael, that there are different points of contact that are going to occur, that have occurred from the what I call the national and subnational level, whether it's federal government, state, county, or local government. And many innovative things are occurring now at the municipal level, as Michael pointed out, particularly in my hometown of Houston that he just mentioned. Let me speak more broadly to engagement at the federal level. Traditionally, the means of engagement have been typically through grant money to help seed research and development projects, or through cost shares, or through loan guarantees issued by specifically by the federal government, by the U.S. Department of Energy, to bring down the cost, let's say, of a demonstration project that's going to test an innovative technology. I think where there is potential for growth to try to fill knowledge gaps, though, is for both sides to have a higher level of awareness of the expectations, the very different expectations that each side has when they collaborate. The private sector sees things very differently. They see things on a different timeline. They have earnings expectations. The federal government typically operates under a multi-year, more extended timeline, spanning multiple administrations. So there's has not been a need for an accelerated push to get technologies demonstrated and scaled and pushed into market. I think that's changed. One thing I've noticed, and I would applaud the current administration, they're actually bringing people in, very significant people from the private sector, and putting them in positions of management authority within the U.S. Department of Energy. I have not seen something like that in my 30 or so years of awareness of the department, to have people of that level be sensitized to the expectations of the private sector and trying to find a way where we can bridge that knowledge gap to do collaborative project development, but do it on a much more accelerated time frame. So I think there are a lot more of that will have to occur, but I'm optimistic.
Fantastic. Okay, just as we start to wrap up here, let's close out with a piece of advice for people in the AAPI community looking to get their start in energy-related positions, or for people already in the industry but want to climb the ladder. Jerry, we'll go to you first for this.
Yeah, my advice would be, be curious and embrace other disciplines and ways of thinking. We've talked a lot about how there's collaboration needed across different groups, and there's just so many people involved across the value chain to get these things done. And, that's something that I've had to work through in entering this space relatively recently. And so the example I'll give is this. One of the most important pieces of education that I've had in this job today is actually my high school chemistry class. I went on to do math and statistics and economics. But some of the most challenging things, and when you're working at an airline and you're talking about fuel, is can I at least have some little bit of fundamental understanding of chemistry to understand something about why is electrolysis a challenging process relative to extracting fossil fuels out of the ground? And so it's a very nerdy example, but I think regardless of what you want to focus on, whether you want to be a communicator, whether you want to be a marketeer, or whether you want to be a chemist, right? Understanding sort of other disciplines and how they function is extremely valuable to leading in the space and having a sort of fulfilling journey.
Jerry, I love that. And a good plug for chemistry teachers out there, for students to pay attention in class. You never know when it will come in handy. Michael, we'll go to you next. Do you have any words of wisdom?
No, I mean, again, I want to echo what Jerry said in terms of, a number of different disciplines that we need across the system in order to, at the end of the day, this is the defining challenge of our time. Climate change is the most defining challenge of our time, and it's going to affect the lives and livelihoods of billions of people. And I think that universities are only now, especially even those in the United States, only in the last several years are finally getting their head around what that means and how to devise institutions that address the sort of cooperative need for expertise to address this issue of climate change. Whether that's in engineering, broader science, economics, political science, all of these disciplines have a role to play in achieving this. And so I guess the recommendation is don't be afraid to go deep on your discipline, and seek out mentors, seek out people that can help you advance in your career, and know that no matter what discipline it is that you've specialized in, whether it's any of the ones I already named or 15 others that I could name, there's some aspect that can be used to address this issue of climate change.
Great advice, Michael. Thank you for being a part of this really important conversation. Last, we'll go to Bob. We'll give you the last word here.
Thank you, Emilie. I'm going to echo some of what the other two speakers have said. I strongly believe that any successful professional needs to have a degree of nimbleness to be able to bring together different disciplines. So what it means is if you're at the entry level and you've got, let's say, an engineering degree, ultimately at some point you want to get an MBA. Or even if you're an art history major, let's say, as an undergrad, ultimately you'll probably want to get something dealing with finance and economics. So first word is be very, very broad in terms of the disciplines you choose. Try to incorporate a different set of skill sets. Have a 360-degree level of awareness of what's going on. If you're working in a company, find out what other people are doing, not just in your department, but in other departments, and try to find a way to marry the various disciplines together to put you ahead to climb that career ladder. Finally, and I think we may have heard this from both Michael and Jerry, try to develop and cultivate your own contact of networks. Try to find a mentor. That's very, very difficult. In our organization, we encourage our senior members to be mentors to junior members. And so I do think that particularly in the AAPI community, where there's not a huge network of professionals to work with that have been there for years, we need to do a much better job. But I do think that the key to professional success is to try to find mentors that help you along the way, in addition to building your own professional portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. Networking, extremely important. Bob, Michael, and Jerry, thank you for this enlightening discussion on the energy transition. We appreciate your time and insight on this complicated puzzle. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in and joining this interesting ongoing conversation and discussion. Have a good night.
Thank you.
What a great day we've had together. I hope you've learned as much as I have from our amazing panelists and speakers. I'd like to recognize our summit partners, Amazon, American Petroleum Institute, BP, Delta Airlines, Edison International, Toyota, Walmart, and Waymo, as well as all of our panelists, moderators, and partners. Your support enables APAICS to fulfill its mission of promoting Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander representation and participation at all levels of the political process. Please visit www.apaics.org to learn more about our work, and I look forward to seeing you the next time.